It's your boy Nova Zeta ENT coming back for part two of LeBron James I Promise School, right? Provide the video by Kip Kami 11. So full transparency, because as you go on this adventure with me to become a better YouTuber, streamer, what have you, right? Content creator, I recorded that entire video and you can hear my kids stomping around the floor upstairs, right? I won't know if you can hear that again until I finish this video because we just push our head into a wall and try to make things work around here at Nova City ENT Studios, right? Um, but I'm real, raw, uncut, and I'm not gonna not post that because I'm not gonna do 30 minutes of content over again, right? But just to kind of recap what we had going on a couple seconds ago to me, minutes, hours to you, right? Uh, the hypothesis that now, since it's part two, you should have watched part one at this point, so I'm not spoiling anything. So my hypothesis for part one was that your home life determines how good your school life is. Your school life can enhance what you have going on, but if your home life is bad, that's why stories are so good. Let me give you an example, right? I have a buddy who was spending 8 bands a year for his kid to go to a private school. And I told him, dog, if you can afford the 8 bands to send your kid to a private school, they'll succeed even if they go to a public school because you can afford an 8 band a month private school. What you bring to the table as far as work ethic, as far as stick to itiveness and adversity, the ability to overcome things, right? Means your kids will get to where they need to be. You're just giving somebody an 8 grand check to validate what you yourself already did. We grew up the same. We grew up poor. You made it, and you're spending all this money a year. You got it, bro. Your kids will be fine if you send them to a public school. I'm not saying I'll influence his decision, but they now go to a public school and they're having the exact same amount of success as they would, and he's got 8 more grand in his pocket a year. Whatever, bro. I'm not saying I did that. He already decided before me, but after I heard that, I just remember that conversation that we had. Sorry, I shook the table. Um, but your home life is a big component of, and this is again, remember how I said in one of my earlier videos that when coons say a thing, they say it in a negative way, and because clicks are garnered from negative activity, and when you speak positively, it doesn't get you nearly as much. If you work in retail, you know what a net promoter is, right? When you get 100 100s and you get 1 0, you get a call from your DM because he tells you you're performing terribly, even though 100 people love you and only one person hates you, right? Um, so the amount of effort you're able to put in to your kids' lives, studying things of that nature, is indicative of where they'll succeed at, right? You know, college. So I'm gonna give you an example of what I mean before I start the video. And thank you for tuning in and sticking with me through this boring story before we get to what you actually came for. If you're able to do homework with your kid, if you're able to say, hey, great job that you did this work, now you can reward yourself with something fun. If you're able to put them in sports, extracurricular activities, that you yourself didn't get to do as a child, wherever you currently are, your kid will be miles ahead of you because you didn't have what you needed to get to where you are now. And if that you're in a great place now, most likely your kids will be able to be in a better place because you'll be able to fill in the missing gaps of stuff you didn't have as a child. So think about, these kids are starting from there. You know, um, if your parents were slaves, I'm not saying that they are right now, but I'm trying to give an example. If your parents were slaves, your parents were the first kids who weren't slaves. They probably didn't have a lot. You have a little bit more than your parents. Your kids should have a little bit more than you if you're not a deadbeat, not in their lives, right? The entire I Promise School problem is that there are kids starting from the slavery aspect in this example. Their parents had nothing. They currently have nothing. So we're judging them and rating them based upon if they had something. So of course the system's going to fail them in this nature. But let's get more into the video and let's let Kip Kami tell us what he found.
Every single one of her students' houses. And to get to them all, which she did routinely, it would take 3 hours. A quote from her as she was helping out a family. And it really just dawned on me. School is not this family's main focus right now. They're literally surviving. Like many did, I Promise got through the worst parts of the pandemic. It was hard, but they did it. But then things took a turn for the worse.
Also developing this evening, the principal of the LeBron James I Promise School in Akron has submitted her resignation following an allegation that she slapped an 11-year-old student.
Brandy Davis, the veteran principal, Akron born and bred, assaulted a student shortly after pandemic restrictions on the school had been lifted. The testimony she gave was that there was a situation in a bathroom and a kid took a dump in the urinal. One of the kids told Miss Davis, who was rushing to the scene of the crime, using some pretty crass language. Miss Davis then said she went into auntie mode, treating the kid like her own nephew, and slapped him for using the S word. The kid's lip was split and bloodied. She immediately
Okay, I'm gonna give you an unpopular opinion. I'm gonna give you it says twofold unpopular. I'm gonna stop saying that, right? I don't have to justify my opinion to you. You just have to tell me if you don't like it or not, right? One, somebody shitting in the urinal, crazy. Like, as I've never seen that in real life. I hope to never see that. Crazy that a kid would do that. It had to be hilarious to the kid at the time. I can't take that away from him. The only only reason why you would do that is because you thought it was funny, and I can't knock that from him. You know what I'm saying? Two, if a kid said somebody shit in a urinal and you're trying to establish some sort of decorum, I'm not saying you should slap him because he's not the one who shit in the urinal. So you should be disciplined for hitting a kid for not being. If he shit in the urinal and said he shit in the urinal, you got it. You hit him, we go about our day because he should not have done either of those things. But are you telling me you hit the kid who told you that a kid shit in a urinal? I can't get behind it. Should you be fired? Nah, I mean, hey, I'm from a different time. I'm from where you talk shit, get hit type of thing. Talk shit, get hit, right? But I can understand this day and age if you're trying to set a precedent that we operate on a different level. I get why she had to be reprimanded in the manner in which she did.
profusely apologized to the family, but the damage had been done. From there, it's kind of downhill. Miss Davis was one of the main faces behind the entire operation. She's still listed as the principal on the I Promise School website, but due to the incidents, she was immediately placed onto paid leave in September of 2021. Davis then resigned in December of that year, and the school began a very turbulent period. While Davis was on paid leave, retired principal Charles Jones stepped in immediately to be the interim principal. Then after a month or so, principal of another APS school, Anthony Lane, took over for the rest of the school year. Going into the 2022-23 school year, things were looking bad. In just 1 year, the school had had 3 principals. But they were able to secure a permanent principal, a University of Akron graduate and assistant principal from a nearby school district, Tawana Ham. She was a promising and eager prospect. But after 1 year, she was moved to another principal position in the district, and shortly after left Akron altogether. The district didn't give a reason, and when the local paper reached out to Ham for comment, she didn't respond. Remember Miss Gerber from before? She was at the I Promise School for the exact same amount of time that Miss Ham was. And, well,
I'll tell you a story from the first time I walked in. The very first day I had shared a classroom with an intervention specialist, and I walked in and he was like, the kid was 7th or 8th grader and he was just chewing out the teacher, and she's a young thing. And I was like, don't speak to her like that. And if you don't talk.
Completely unrelated. You see the rock on her hand? Golly, they getting some money in Akron. They get into the bag. Wow.
To me, I don't know who you think you are. You don't come in here and talk to me. Walks out, slams the door. I mean, my first 30 seconds in the classroom.
Wow.
And that kind of sums up how the kids act. They call it a walk and talk, and anytime they don't want to be in class, they throw a fit and they walk out of the classroom. I had an altercation with a very large 6th grade student who was trying to fight another student, and I was trying to break it up, and then he, turned on me like, get out of my face. I don't even want to repeat what he said to me. And there was at the front door of Akron, or at I Promise, is an Akron cop. And I looked at him and I was like, are you going to do anything? And he just slowly unfolds himself. He goes, they don't listen to me either. That's the response.
Wow. Okay.
And it was after that incident, I called my boss and I said, if you don't get me out of this school, I will quit right now.
her experience speaks for itself. A lot of these problems were evident and documented in the first year of the school, but progress was still ultimately made. But when the school went into the pandemic and then lost its founding principal, the visions that the founding team came up with weren't able to be executed properly. New students came in with the same problems as the old students, and it got to the point where it seemed that the culture was dictated more by the students than by the teachers, at least according to Ms. Gerber.
The teachers try to get kids to do things. I mean, I will be like, it's not the staff. Like, there's no support there at all. There's no accountability. I mean, we've got 7th graders beating up 3rd graders. on the school bus. We have kids. I mean, when I say fights daily, multiple, constantly. Fights, fights, fights. The amount of tears that I saw from teachers that work there, everyone's put in for transfers, transfers, transfers. Like, I knew at least 5 teachers who put in for transfers because they just don't want to be there.
The teachers became overstressed and overworked, a lot of which had to do with another critical component, IEPs. If you're not familiar, it's
Before we get into this, right? Like, so she's talking about like, even the authorities couldn't discipline these children, right? Discipline these children, right? I'm assuming there's only one, maybe 2 cops in this school. Again, as an effort to make sure I'm as transparent as possible, the Venezuelan president, what some of the stuff he said about Brago Neto, like, y'all, I'm sure somebody in the comments will tell me the real name or the whole name of the guy, right? And he said, I can't just give him, but yes, you can. Stop it, shut up, right? Um, don't lie. You just don't know where he is, or you're trying to be embarrassed. But one of the things that I'm like, well, you can't knock the results of what he's saying, right? He One of the things I can't stand about, and this is political, right? About leftists in a certain respect is that they're like, hey, the way he's treating gang members in his maximum security prison is inhumane. I'm under the impression that if someone is inhumane, you go one level above that, right? I'm gonna give an example. Like I tell my kids all the time: if somebody speaks to you in a disrespectful manner, first thing you do is you go to a teacher. You say, "Hey, this person's disrespecting me. How do we settle this?" Obviously, to varying degrees. I've got a lot of kids and a lot of I've got kids in 8 different age ranges, right? But hey, this person hit me or they talk to me this way, and then they have to deal with it. If they don't deal with it, then you're allowed to go one level above where they are, right? So if you tell a teacher the teacher can't handle it, then you've got to handle it. So if the person's talking to you in a certain way, you talk to them in that exact same way. If that person puts hands on you, you get to put hands on that person one step above, right? You get to put hands on them in a way that won't make them transgress against you again, right? They've already shown that they're willing to transgress against you. You get to go one step above. I'll deal with the teacher at that point. They've got to answer to me as to why my kid had to do one step above, right? And that same thing is if gang members, and to a point, right? Because I don't speak in absolutes. There's always nuance, and if you try to say like, what about it? Yes, we can talk about that. What about, right? If someone is if someone has ended someone else's life, they don't get any rights anymore. I believe that you can't convince me unless that person ended it because they were in self-defense or whatever, right? But that's the caveat, and that's what we have to go into when we, sorry about that, talk about different people, right? Um, if you're a position of authority and it's just one of you and a bunch of kids, and the most you can do is say, "Don't do that." Once you say, "Don't do that," and the kid goes, "You're not my real dad," and then you're not allowed to do anything beside that, then you've done your job. You've done what the extent of the punishment you can deal out is, right? Like if anybody has played sports, you remember when someone fails a drill or when someone say, I'm gonna give you a great example, right? It's 30 people out there on that football field, and somebody says, the next person who shortchanges the drill, we all running. What happens after that, right? That one dude who's constantly doing other stuff that they're not supposed to be doing, right? He shortchanges the drill. We all run. What do the other 29 people do? We ostracize that one person, and that controls all 30 people. There is a level of understanding you have to have that it's not the positions of authority that control a group. It's the group that controls the group, right? And if you've already got a bunch of people who are comfortable with shirking authority, they can't control the group. So you have to have more than the amount of people who are shirking the authority to get them back in line. Do you get what I'm saying?
to document IEP, standing for Individualized Education Program, in the American K-12 system, assigned to children that have a learning disability and require extra attention in the classroom. These disabilities range anywhere from dyslexia to speech impairments to autism. And these kids are often in regular classes with other students, with just a bit more attention given to them from the teachers. Nationally, there are about 15% of these types of students. In the Akron Public School District, there's about 17%. As of 2022, the I Promise School had 30% that required an IEP, double the national rate and damn near double the districts. In some classrooms, that number was as high as 45%, and one of the grade levels had 50% of children with some sort of learning disability. Damn near illegal in Ohio. and straight up illegal in Akron. It got so bad that the Akron Public School District placed a limit on kids who had gotten an IEP to I Promise, capping them at 10%. It was this environment that made I Promise so difficult for teachers. But according to Ms. Gerber, that wasn't the only issue.
Because what you see on social media and what you see, like,
I hate to stop it so much, right? I really don't. You came here to watch this video, right? But what he kind of said is actually, I'm gonna give you an example of how this relates to a lot of the discourse that happens with racial tensions, right? So, if the national average of people who have IEPs is 13%, you've got 50% in some of these classrooms. That's an anomaly, right? You're hoarding a lot of these people together, right? I'm gonna go on the Nick Fuentes thing where like Nick Fuentes says like, "Oh, you're completely justified in hating and being racist toward every black person you see, whatever." Right? The only reason I could give him any sort of credence, which, hey man, like stop it, shut up, you're not being realistic, right? If when people say, "Oh man, this is black people shit" or "this is white people shit," when they say black people shit, it's usually some form of poverty, right? It's usually an experience in which you don't have a lot of resources. And I always say, like, just because a lot of black people are poor doesn't mean that the experience you're having is solely tied to black people. And I'm gonna give you an example. Like, somebody will say to somebody to me like, "Oh, I was black. Oh yeah, I must be black because my parents don't change the battery in the fire the fire alarm." Um, and I go like, no, that's just an irresponsible thing to do. Or they'll say like, oh, I must be black because like, I eat bologna sandwiches with hot sauce on them every day. And I'm like, no, that means you were poor. Just because a lot of black people are poor doesn't mean that this is a black thing to do. It's a poor person thing to do. Just a lot of black people may be poor. Now we can talk about the reasons why we may be more poor than you guys, but these aren't specifically black people things. These are class-based issues, but you have to understand why somebody would be a part of a certain class. So if you can't grade this school if they have an anomaly as their norm. If 10% of kids, because my oldest son's on IEP, right, and for a lot of times he has a helper, when he's in class at neurotypical schools, and so he may be the only one in that class with a helper. If you transition them to a class where 50% of people need helpers, if you can't count and find, let's say there's 20 people in that class and there's not 10 people to help out each specific kid, then you're going to get a worse result than if you had those right amount of people or right amount of numbers. He doesn't say in this video, but if 50% of kids in in each class in a grade needed an IEP, and not all of them would require somebody to help them through that, right? But that means they each need extra help, and they have one teacher per class. You cannot get a good result from that. It's not that they're underperforming children; is that they have gathered a bunch of anomalies and made them the norm without addressing what that norm would require.
LeBron, everything is given, nothing is earned. Or, I mean, everything is earned, nothing is given. It's actually the opposite. Everything is given, nothing is earned. I Promise isn't any different than the kids that we're getting in Akron Public Schools. They're just getting selected. Half their siblings are with us. Do you see what I mean? Like, everyone's got trauma. I don't know. Like, it's just a different environment. I've never been in an environment where there's no accountability like that.
And this was reflected in the report given 2 years ago.
You know what? Again, sorry to stop again. I'm not sorry. But something I just kind of realized, right? What if, look at the size of the rock on her hand. I'm not saying that she doesn't care. I'm simply saying it's very rare for people to marry outside of their economic range, right? So if she's got a husband who's got enough to give her, like, that's got to be at least 3, 4 bands, right? She's cosplaying charity. I'm not saying that in a rude way. I'd like to ask her if anybody, if the teacher, if you see this and you'd like to reach out to me, because I'm not going to reach out to you. That's invasive on my part, right? But what's your socioeconomic status, right? Because a lot of rich people go into poor areas thinking they're going to be a savior, and they realize, man, this is a lot harder than I thought it would be. I would love to see the demographic breakup of people who. No, I'm not saying again. Giving any I'm not saying that the difficulty they're going to have isn't there. I'm simply saying I don't trust people myself. And it could be something like that has to do with my economic upbringing, right? Or my lived experiences, right? I would never trust a rich person to tell me how they could get out of the trenches. I would trust somebody who has gotten out of the trenches to be like, hey, here's what I did, here's what you might be able to do. But someone's like, oh yeah, my daddy just gave me $1 million, and then I just, man, stop talking. I'm not interested in hearing what you have to say unless you're going to lend me $1 million to get this popping, right? Like, if she has a certain expectation of what her dream would have been, but she always has the option of returning to where wealth is, then she's not going to have the same investment in these children that a lot of these guys do, right? Like, if someone can just be like, man, now that I've always had it well, let me go and help these kids who haven't had it. Then they go in and feel just a little bit of friction, and they go, well, this is hard. I'm going to go back to where people already had it. I'd be interested to see how many teachers that they have are in that situation, because in my experience, people who usually, you get two types of people who are willing to make things hard on themselves: people who don't have anything and then want to uplift others, or people who have so much they think that they have the answer.
After the 2023 school year, Keith Lichty, the liaison between the I Promise School and APS, compiled a report to present to the board concerning the I Promise students and their scores. The first report since the first year in 2019. But the news wasn't so good this time.
3 years, not one child passed the state test in math, not one.
What this board member was referring to was this chart, one of a series in Keith's presentation that told a story quite opposite from the end of the first year, from a time of promise and opportunity to one of stagnation and even failure. After the pandemic, kids from the original 3rd grade class, with kids like Nate, not a single child passed a grade level state exam in math for 3 straight years. This is even more damning when considering their testing protocols.
It takes the I Promise kids 5 weeks to finish a test. 5 minutes, I'm not kidding, and they want a break. I need a break. And they're allowed to have one. They get up and they walk out of the classroom. They need a break.
Not only were the kids not doing well, they ended up, by the 8th grade, growing less by kids who weren't selected to go to the I Promise school and went to other Akron schools despite being eligible for I Promise. Again, by the time these kids left 8th grade, the kids who were eligible for the I Promise school in Akron and didn't end up going were growing more than the I Promise kids were. In math, 42% of kids were making a year's worth of progress in school.
I'm going to give you I think, and I'm only speculating, right? The kids who didn't get concentrated into a group of people with extra disabilities or extra opportunities to succeed would probably fare better, because you would be one of the only kids in your class who had to have special and extra tutelage, right? Like, if you go to a school where everybody needs 5 weeks to complete a test and you only have one teacher for that class, it'll never get done. But if you go to a school where you're the only one who needs 5 weeks, but you have a dedicated resource to move you along, of course you're going to need less time as you go through. Um, and these are the kind of things where, like, statistics. You remember I said, like, a while ago in one of my first videos, I said statistics don't really matter, and you shouldn't worry about them, because it depends upon the information you use. Media Man, again, follow Media Man if you haven't, right? But he does a lot of this stuff, right? Where he says, like, somebody will have a statistic, but they won't explain what that statistic means to them. They'll say, this is what this statistic says. And then nobody else goes like, well, here's what it means to me. How do you combat what I'm thinking? If you have an entire school of people who need extra help and you don't have extra staff, then there's no way you're going to be able to overcome this hurdle. But if you have one kid or two kids who need extra study time and you can just remove them to a class, everybody remember that this is going to sound insensitive. But when I was in school, there was a class of people who they had one teacher the entire day. This joke, it's not a, it's I'm gonna laugh, right? Because we used to have this joke, right? Did you have one teacher all day or did you have a bunch of teachers all day? Because there was one class of kids who had the same teacher all day. They were, oh man, okay. They all left one class and walked in a single file line to the next class, and then they walked in a single file line to the next class, because they had each had a string of classes. But it's funny when I was a teenager, but as I've gotten older, you realize, yeah, that's what they needed to get caught up with modern society, with polite society, right? They needed the extra help, and the fact that they didn't have to be in the common area, they could be in their own extra bubble where they got what they needed, help them. You can't have an entire school of that if you don't have to scale the resources and the staff to do that, right? Not only staff willing to do that, extra staff to rotate in and rotate out, right? Like they're not going to succeed because you're focusing all of the people who couldn't do a thing in one area, as opposed to one or two people who couldn't do a thing.
Compared to just 27% of I Promise's kids in the 8th grade. And in 7th and 8th grade, in English, I Promise kids were still learning less than kids in other Akron schools. And when we're talking about this year's worth of progress, by the way, this is again meaning if all of the 8th graders came into school with a 5th grade math level, then only 20% of them in I Promise would end up with a 6th grade math level by the end of the year. The APS board president at the time, Derek Hall, made this point.
Those numbers could be 100% growth, grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. But if they came to us 2 years behind, they'd leave us 2 years behind. If they're not exceeding 100%, then they're not actually catching up.
Still though, we do have to keep in mind that the I Promise School is quite literally the first of its kind. LeBron James and his foundation were the first to help open up a public school. And with unplanned obstacles like a global pandemic and a principal assaulting a student, there's not that much that could have been done about it. At the end of the day, it is still a high-class facility that's helping out underprivileged kids. And when I think about the kids that I met at House 330, multiple going into fields that wouldn't have been possible without LeBron's foundation, I have hope. Mrs. Gerber, with all of the issues that she took with the school, even conceded that it could work.
That the premise of what he wanted to do was a really good idea, and I think bringing in the upper grades ruined that. If they would have kept it with 3rd and 4th grade, they would have saw big things happen.
Since that report was made in 2023,
You see, I don't think she's understanding even where she needs to be, right? They should have started with kindergarten, right? What did old boy say? I'm gonna say this, clip it if you want to, where he says there's some brothers in the hood who gotta go for good. They gotta go for good. And I don't. This is going to sound negative, right? But if you get to the 8th and 9th grade and you still can't read at a 4th or 5th grade level, you have to be found. You have another path. You have another path that you can. There's no such thing as an unsolvable case, but you can't put every square into a circle hole. You can't put every square peg into a circle hole. You've got to start at kindergarten, because if their home life is terrible, once they acclimate from in kindergarten, then going forward from there, they'll be all right. But you can't start from 6th, 7th grade. That's too far gone. You'll have some edge cases, but that's the reason why like Rocky is such an inspirational story, right? Like a guy who shouldn't be able to do a thing did do a thing. We don't do stories about the average everyday accountant, because you're supposed to be able to be an accountant, right? But the autistic guy who solves murder cases and fraud cases because he's autistic and an accountant is the reason why you would make a movie. Do you get what I'm saying?
the school has made some progress, led by Principal Stephanie Davis, a fully committed Akron native. Because of the bad test scores, the I Promise School was placed under state intervention in 2 categories: Black students and students with disabilities, where both groups were testing in the bottom 5th percentile of the state. In February of 2025, the school was able to exit out of that classification, which is of course progress, but there's much more work to be done. When the inaugural class graduates high school, it's very likely that it'll show that the kids would have done just as fine, if not better, if they had went to a regular Akron school. But then again, it's not quite fair to judge I Promise on its first class. Like an I Promise representative said,
we also, in essence, opened a middle school during the time of a pandemic, and a lot of the initial work was put into the development of what did the elementary school look like and how was it built. But I don't know if everybody came back to the table and did the same level of work, given that we were in the middle of a pandemic, to build out the middle school.
With a more stable leadership culture, more experience, and more tweaks, the stats will improve. Now, will it end up that the I Promise School will be a nationally recognized model for urban and public school excellence? Probably not. But will it change lives for students and their families? From what I saw in Akron, that seemed to be the case, school or no school. The kids that I saw were empowered to see and pursue their dreams. So, again, is the I Promise School failing? You tell me.
So I'm gonna leave you with this. I think you have to look at this like a small farm school that runs the wing T offense, right? All my athletes are gonna understand what I'm saying. There is no way in the world in which a small school in the middle of the boonies should beat a school full of athletic kids from the city. The difference between them and you, and especially if you went to an IPS school or you went to a public school, right? The difference between them and you is because those kids have been running that same offense and defense since they were in kindergarten. If you were the right guard at this small school in the first grade, you are the right guard in this same offense when you got to high school. And then they come to you, a group of kids who got bused from the west side of town to the east side of town because your school district changed again this year because they're trying to fill some sort of arbitrary quota. And you're a quarterback who just met every receiver this year. You're a wide receiver who played running back last year at this school, and you're meeting all these kids for the first time. You guys are way more athletic than this other team. But when they run this play, they've run this exact play for the last 12 years. Every single person knows exactly where they need to be. You cannot show them a defense that is not able to be countered because they've seen every single defense you have for 12 years. They get all the way to state. Their 5'1", 110-pound quarterback somehow has 3,000 passing yards and 2,000 rushing yards in this wonky ass offense. They've got two 260-pound running backs who run 5'140s, who have 2,000 rushing yard seasons because they've been doing the exact same thing from the time they were in kindergarten to the time they graduate high school. That is the difference between what this I Promise school tried to do between what a lot of these local schools can do. You have to start it at kindergarten. You cannot start it at seventh grade and think you're going to make these kids able to read. You can't start it at third grade and think you're going to get these kids out of where they need to be. You need to start all of these extra things that LeBron gave these kids has to start at kindergarten or preschool, right? Or even daycare. It's one of the things that I profess to even my friends, right? Like, don't skip schools around because you think you're trying to get a better leg up. They can go to any school. If you're determined for them to succeed, stay on them. Put them in the same school. Let them have the same friends, same teachers, same curriculum all the way through high school. You be the difference. These kids don't have the difference, from what we heard just from those examples. Single family households or single parent households, fathers aren't involved, some of them are dead, uncles committing crimes, drugs everywhere. You can't expect those kids to improve in 6 to 7 hours per day. So I'm not saying LeBron can't get what he needs done. I'm just saying it'll be 10 to 12 years before you can judge these kids on the success that this school could have. So, hey, like I said, go follow Kip Kami 11. I'm sure he's got other stuff that's great. I'm going to follow him myself on my other page. Thanks for joining me on this. Again, one.